Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our brand new study in the Mystical Theology of the Eastern Church by Lossky. And we're looking at a 1976 translation, but it was originally written in 1944. We're going to take a look at the introduction, which is pages 7 to 23, and it's a very good introduction to get us started in this new study. Let's go to block 1. Mystical theology. It expresses a doctrinal attitude. It shows forth the divine mystery, which is revelation. It is inaccessible to normal understanding because it is the hidden depth of truth, and it is a specific Christian experience, a direct experience of the truth. And here's a key point. There is no sharp distinction between mysticism and theology. We must live the doctrine expressing revealed theology. We must live the revealed truth that appears as a mystery. It is the inner transformation work of the Spirit. Mystical experience equals the working out of theological truth. Doctrine expresses the inner experience of truth. There's no theology without mysticism. Mysticism is the crown of theology. As the crown of theology, Christian theology is a means to a transcendent end. And that transcendent end is called Theosis Unification with the triune Godhead. We seek Theosis Unification. It is the Logos that opens the way to Theosis. The fullness of the human nature has been assumed by the Logos in Christ. Our whole humanity must enter into Theosis Unification. We're talking about a whole humanity theosis. Through the cooperation of our human will, theological doctrine serves theosis. And in 2 Corinthians 12, 2 through 4, Paul experienced Theosis Unification when he was taken up into the third heaven in contemplative prayer. So, the key point in block 1 is going to be note 5b. There's no theology without mysticism. And for mysticism, you could substitute Christian experience. There's no theology without Christian experience. Theology and experience are different sides of the same coin of faith. So, go to 1.5 as your key point. Let's move on to block 2. Okay, block 2. The great schism between the East and the West. Doctrine must serve theosis. The object of faith is examined in itself through an autonomous church, which is beyond all secular determinism. Our faith is beyond secular determinism. The question of the procession of the Spirit ended up splitting the East and the West. But it is spirituality that matters, says Lossky. Dogma is secondary. Spirituality is that which takes priority. Now, of the dogmatic differences, again, there is no sharp distinction between theology and mystical experience. There's no sharp distinction between faith and experience. We are a church combining local tradition and historical destiny. Okay, let's go to 2.4. The trend of tradition and destiny. We all adhere to a single truth, and we defend that truth against all heresy. We witness to the single truth of Christ. The church exhibits a homogeneous character of spiritual kinship with an eschatology that has a goal of theosis unification with the triune Godhead. Okay, let's go to block 3 and take a look at the contribution of Hogiography. Now, hagios in Greek is sanctification, holiness. So hagiography is written testimony concerning the saints and their holiness. The monastic saints practice ascetic rule and interior prayer in order to attain theosis unification through the vigil of the inward man. The vigil of the inward man creates a change in our human nature. We are transformed by transfiguration. Remember our study on transfiguration. And that exemplifies the strong spiritual life. Eastern hagiography gives us examples of past saints. Their writings about holiness and spiritual perfection exemplified a spirituality between God and one's soul. These writings emerged in the 13th century. Christian experience was emerging out of church teaching. But the dogmatic differences between East and West were highlighted. But it's part of the tradition of the East and the West that we have testimony of the saints, written testimony of the holiness of the saints. That's called hagiography. So let's go back to block 1, and I have to say that block 1, we have to go with note 5. We work out theological content in Christian experience. There's no theology without mystical Christian experience. On block 2, note 3. There's no sharp distinction between theology and mystical Christian experience. So block 1, note 5, block 2, note 3, and block 3, let's go to 2. We just had the lesson on the transfiguration, and we receive transformation by the glory of God conferred upon us. So note 2 for block 3. But the introduction shows us that Lossky has no intention of turning mysticism into something unrelated to Christian theology. It is intimately related to Christian theology. You must have a single truth Christian theology that informs your experience as a Christian believer. The knowledge of the mind must be reflected in the feeling and conviction of the heart. Knowledge of the mind and conviction of the heart both are sides of the same coin of faith. We've got to remember that for Lossky, in this work, he is not going to separate theological truth from mystical Christian experience. They go hand in hand. And the examples we have are the saints. And we have writing concerning the holiness of the saints beginning in the 13th century. So our reminder is the current hagiography that's available. Theology is a means to an end. And the end is theosis unification with the triune Godhead. So here's your triad. Theological truth leads to mystical Christian experience, which leads to theosis unification. That is your recall triad. Deep, convicting theological truth leads to mystical Christian experience, which brings about theosis unification with the triune Godhead. So aletheia, truth, mystical experience, and Theosis Unification. The triad is aletheia truth, hagiadzo experience of sanctification, and Theosis Unification. And that's going to wrap up a very brief introduction, but a very good introduction, because now we know that Lossky is not going to separate theology from Christian experience. They're going to go hand in hand. So that's the introduction. We'll pick up next lesson on page 24.